All right, welcome everybody to the Niskanen Center's webinar, Supporting Families with State Tax Credits, the New England Model. So a quiet revolution is taking place in state houses across the nation as policymakers rethink their approach to supporting families in state tax codes. Once rare, tax credits for children and other dependents are increasingly common across the country. 21 states have introduced or expanded these credits in the past 5 years alone. But these credits come in all shapes and sizes. They differ widely in terms of things like income eligibility. Some have been non-refundable with phase-ins, some have been refundable with phase-ins, and some have been fully refundable and have no income requirements at all. Some phase out quickly, targeting solely the poor. Others are universal or nearly universal. They differ in dependent eligibility. Some cover all children under 18. Others are more targeted toward younger children, and others are a bit broader and include adult dependents. They vary in terms of benefit amount. The maximum value of these credits range from about $100 to almost $1,800. And they differ in their origins. Some credits are made from scratch. Others were converted into refundable credits from non-refundable credits or exemptions and deductions. An emerging New England model, which focuses on making these credits effectively universal with no phase-in, so they're fully refundable, in a high or no phase out at all, offers a promising approach. We're joined today by leading reformers from Vermont, Massachusetts, and Maine to discuss their respective states' experience designing these family tax credits. We'll introduce now retired State Representative Jana Ansell, who is chair of the Committee on Ways and Means, Massachusetts State Senator Susan Moran, chair of the Joint Committee on Revenue, and Maine State Representative Maureen Moteri, majority leader, is unfortunately a bit under the weather today, but we're lucky enough to have the woman behind the woman, Eleanor Snyder, legislative aide to Rep. Terry, is joining us here today. So we'll kick things off by hearing from each of our panelists before opening up to audience Q&A. Please use the chat function to ask your questions. We'll then share them with the panel for what will be a great discussion. So to start things off, I'll turn it over to Representative Ansell. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I have to say that I love the idea that there's a New England model for something like this. So that's a great foundation for this discussion. The Vermont child tax credit was adopted in 2022. It was my last year in the legislature after 18 years and 10 years chairing the Ways and Means Committee. So very briefly, our tax credit is $1,000 per child up to the age of 6. So it's 5 and under. And it phases out, it's a full credit until 125,000 adjusted gross income, and then there's a phase out that ends at 175,000. And one of the things that we did as we designed it is that we didn't distinguish between single and joint filers. So those figures apply to households, whether they're single or joint. The thinking there, of course, is that a single parent with 2 kids has similar child expenses to 2 parents and only 1 income. So it made sense to not make a distinction. The bill that we passed also made changes in our child and dependent care credit. We had one, but it was 24%, and it did phase. It wasn't fully refundable. We changed that to 72% of the federal child and dependent care credit and made it fully refundable. And we also increased our earned income tax credit in that bill. We had been at 36%. There was a time when I was able to say that we were the highest or second highest in the country. Other states have gotten ahead of us on that, but we went to 38%. And we've always had a fairly generous EITC, and that's also fully refundable. The bill also did some other things. When you're doing a big tax package, you have to give and take a little bit. And so there were other changes, including increasing Social Security exemption and some military retirement changes and so on. But the real focus was on families and was on families with young children. So how do we manage to do that? You know, I'd love to tell you it was a story of great planning and deliberation and analysis and all the stuff that ought to go into good legislation. As it happened, it wasn't. We were just incredibly lucky that a bunch of things came together at the right time to make it happen. The summer of 2022, I think like most states, we actually had our revenues were very strong. And I happened to get word, kind of informally, that the administration was going to propose a package of tax cuts. And I had mostly been thinking, well, revenues are really good. We're not going to do anything much this year. But when I heard that the administration was going to do a package of tax cuts, and it's an administration of the opposite party. So I made the assumption incorrectly that those tax cuts were going to benefit businesses and wealthy individuals. I was wrong about that. But since I didn't have any real information, I was kind of my reaction, my response sort of was in that context. So the first question I had for myself was, how much are we talking about in terms of tax cuts? And based on my own thinking, my own knowledge about revenue, and some conversations with our fiscal staff, I came up with a figure of 50 million. The administration didn't share their figure with me. The $50 million, just to put it in context, Vermont has 620,000 people. I think it's about the size of Boston, half the size of Maine. So $50 million is a lot of money for us. And so that was this pretty substantial package. And then I thought, well, what should we do with that 50 million if we're going to cut 50 million out of revenue? Like I think everyone was listening to this and everyone on this panel, I had been watching what was going on with the federal child tax credit during the pandemic. And my constituents, my neighbors, I have 3 kids who are in their 30s and 40s. They have grandchildren. Just watching the impact of that federal child tax credit on families was it was just impressive. And we were at a point when we were looking at this when we didn't know whether the federal one would be extended or not. And so I thought, okay, let's figure out what we can do for 50 million with our Vermont child tax credit. And at this point, I started talking with our speaker, who was very supportive, with other colleagues in the House. But it was not, I wish I could say that we worked with a lot of organizations and did a lot of thinking about this. Frankly, we didn't. We were just incredibly lucky. So we put a bill in. I had, in addition to some colleagues, chairs of other committees in the House, I also had one Republican sponsor, which was good, a member of my committee, and several other members of my committee sponsoring it. And so we put the bill in. It turned out that the administration's tax cut proposal really was also focused on families and on individuals. They wanted to do a major expansion of EITC, but as we all know, that's tied to work. And we wanted to take a slightly different tax. So that the disagreements had more to do with how best to help families and how best to help kids, not so much whether we were going to do it. And amazingly, their figure was 48 million. So my figure was 50. It was a really good guess. And kind of informed guess, but it was a guess. They wanted their version. We wanted our version. We realized very early on that $50 million isn't going to buy us what we wanted. You know, it would have been great if we'd been able to do kids up to 18. Couldn't do that. Great if we could have made it universal. We couldn't do that. But so we developed a package that I think, because we were able to do $1,000 a year, that it really was a meaningful, going to have a meaningful impact on families. And the two sort of challenges in making this happen that surprised me a little bit. One shouldn't have surprised me, but they did a bit. One was the Senate that was not. We're Democratic House, we're a Democratic Senate, but the Senate was not all that on board. And the other thing, when we put the bill together, we decided not to include offsetting revenues. So this really was a tax expenditure. This was going to cost $50 million. And in Vermont, the appropriations and the revenue committees are completely separate rooms, separate chairs, separate members. And so what I realized fairly early on is that I was getting a little bit in their space, because I wasn't restoring those revenues. We were just going to use them for a tax cut. So it was a revenue bill, but it was a revenue bill that cost money. And so there was a little bit of tension, I think, there. We all agreed that this was a good thing to do. We ended up with a program that was estimated to cost 32 million. It also, the whole package was about 40 million because we also made changes in EITC, as I mentioned, and a couple other things. We weren't sure whether the governor was going to sign it, but he did. And then, so it took effect in 2022. It took effect for tax year 2022. And the first year that people can actually claim it is this most recent filing year, 2023. And this last session, I was gone since I retired. This was something I felt really great about accomplishing, and I thought, okay, I'm ready to go. That when the legislature decided to do a very substantial investment in childcare, there was a proposal that got put on the table, particularly from the Senate, to fund it by repealing the child tax credit. We fended that off, didn't happen, but I think it is a harbinger of some of the difficulties that we're going to see in the future. So that's brief, and I'll look forward to questions and conversation about how it all worked.
Great, now we'll hear about Massachusetts.
Thank you. I really so enjoyed listening to Janet and her process. I mean, it's not only an incredible legacy to, I think, economic future of families in the state, but it's so interesting to see the way things come together because they're always different. And I will say that not too long ago, I was at an NCSL conference, and the Massachusetts folks I was with really lauded Vermont's work. And it's, you're always so well informed when you see someone stepping out and taking that shot. In this year in Massachusetts, and it's, we have to look at this setting. We're coming out of COVID. So many folks, particularly women, losing traction in their careers, or two-income families trying to juggle. We really took a hit, so it was a good opportunity to take a look at childcare. And we have passed one of the most generous child and family tax credit packages in the country as part of a larger $1 billion tax relief package, I'm proud to say. The child and family tax credit's a combination of previously established household dependent tax credit / dependent care tax credits. In 2021, Massachusetts began offering a fully refundable tax credit for dependent family members, and Janet made a good distinction explaining why that's important. And that was inspired by the Federal American Rescue Plan enacted by Congress in 2021. The credit covers children under 13, people with disabilities, and senior dependents aged 65 and older. In Massachusetts, it's going to benefit an estimated 570,000 families. It eliminates the cap on dependents and increases the credit for dependent children and disabled adults from $180 to $440 beginning in 2024. And it aims to assist families with the growing cost of living that's being experienced, not just in Massachusetts, but New England and certainly nationwide. It also incorporates the EITC with respect to any income under 60,000. It's going to increase from 30% to 40% of the federal credit. There's a rental deduction that's been increased from 3,000 to 4,000. Student loan repayment is in there with assistance by employers to pay back student loans now being exempt from taxable income. So we really tried to pull a bunch of things together to really, help families. We've at the same time got a housing crisis going on, a workforce issue that we're trying to address. So it really is about, competitiveness and economic health for everyone, which really helps address the stress that all of our families are under. Prior to this, Massachusetts offered a coordinated family and community engagement program, which was local community based. And so I really want to credit the advocates in this regard, which, whereas Janet was mentioning things just sort of fell together with Massachusetts, this has been an incredibly complicated and dense, data-driven effort that is, proud to say, still ongoing. Our fiscal year 24 budget funding, we've got $714 million for child care for families involved with Department of Children and Families, Department of Transitional Assistance, and for low-income families. We've got $475 for the Commonwealth Cares for Children grants. And fiscal year 24, it's going to be the first year that the annual state budget includes a full year of funding for these C3 grants, which really is emblematic and signals the historic commitment to maintain this crucial lifeline for our early education and care sector. 85 million in rate increases for subsidized childcare providers across the Commonwealth. We all know how important that is. And 20 million for childcare resource and referral agencies. And I'm so fortunate to work with colleagues, Senator Lewis, for example, the Senate President, Chair of Ways and Means, Mike Rodericks, really appreciating what this is all going to mean and tremendous bipartisan support and across both the House and the Senate. And we look at, so what are we pulling together now? And I'm the co-lead sponsor for what we sort of colloquially call the Common Start legislation. We took all last year and pulled together professionals and advocates from top to bottom in the child care and early care fields, and looked at what was really going to be impactful. The bill that we're currently proposed, like the tax relief that Governor Healy had offered, it really aims to tackle barriers and accessibility. Families that have an income below 50% of the statewide median income will be provided free access to early childhood education and childcare. That's what we're looking at, which of course allows opportunities to be able to afford your increased utilities bills, your, and ability, hopefully, to get access to housing, which is really getting further and further away. Also looks at increasing the quality of care. As an attorney before I was a legislator, I represented child care business for decades, and really looking at the way and really increase in costs and just at the teacher level, at the parent level, at the owner level. and looking at how people can really practice in childcare to the top of their certifications, have more opportunities for certifications. This is an industry that if we don't support now, it's going to affect directly all of our kitchen table issues. Really look at the health of our next generation moving forward. The more we boost childcare right now, the better humans that we are. We all know this. The legislative framework is really also looking at kind of a stable source of funding going forward. Right now, almost half of the families in Massachusetts are eligible for benefits, and on average, each family could save up to $13,000 a year, which is just those child care average costs alone. I mean, that can be, as you know, it's sort of like a college tuition at this point, and some numbers and estimates go even higher. An estimated 10,400 mothers would be able to join or rejoin the workforce and benefit the economy, along with, you know, when you look at examples within our families of, you know, where my kids remind me of first generation college, and you know, they really let me know, and sort of, you know, I put one foot in front of the other. You know, I was that working mom who, you know, you open up the lunchbox and the teacher needs a milk carton for tomorrow, and you open up the fridge, you take that milk that you just bought, pour it into something else, and then there, you know, off to lunch with the lunches and everything else. I mean, we're doing even more multitasking now than ever. So what I want to just end my little piece amongst these this talented panel is to just talk about, you know, the child independent tax credit being implemented using a broad definition of family, as Janet, I think, pitched off. You know, the families are broad and tax credits should be as well. I loved the math that you did. You know, single parents have single incomes. I mean, we really have to follow the plan through. It's the simplest money to put money back in the pockets of families so that they have choices of how to, you know, where best spends. I mean, it's not a silver bullet, but it's a foundation. And the credits need to be paired with policy changes that address the underlying barriers to access, costs, workforce shortages, program limitations, equity of all kinds. So, you know, I just want to thank you, Josh, for having this forum. It's very important, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you. Now we'll turn it over to hear about Maine's experience.
Thank you so much, Susan and Janet. That was wonderful. I really appreciate Susan learning more about what Massachusetts is doing in the childcare sector as well. I think, you know, we're in the similar boat in terms of New England in general, dealing with housing crisis, workforce shortage, and childcare issues are all compounding factors, and they're all related to work, you know, working families and how can we support families broadly. So I think it's really exciting that we're able to be here today to talk about this one policy piece as well. So yeah, I work for Representative and House Majority Leader Mo Terry, and she was formerly the chair of the Taxation Committee for many years. So she is deep in the weeds in tax, and I've been working for her for about 4 years now, and I'm very excited to share some of her successes with you all. So just last year is when we passed Maine's child tax credit, and it really came after we saw the impact that the expanded federal child tax credit had on Mainers' lives here, and really the direct relief that it was able to provide to low-income families who particularly were previously ineligible for the credit because of the lack of refundability. So that had a particularly dramatic impact, I think, on Maine, especially compared to other states, especially when thinking about how it reduced our child poverty and hunger rates here. It was really significant. Like both of your states and probably many others, we have some larger rural chunks, and I think that had a really big impact in those regions particularly. So our credit it's going to go into effect, sorry for the background noise, it's going to go into effect in tax year 2024, since we just passed it. And it is going to mean that families earning below 30,000 or if filing jointly 42,000 will now receive $300 per child annually, really per dependent annually. So our credit came from a rework of an existing dependent tax credit that we had that was not fully refundable. That credit we had in place, and I think after we saw the dramatic impact from the federal expansion, and then we saw the impact of it being taken away as well, was huge. To really see that loss for folks in our communities, folks who need it most, was really devastating. So in the legislature, I think Rep. Terry, as well as others, saw a need and an opportunity to take action. Josh reached out about this, which was really awesome and wonderful, and helped spurred some movement on our end, as well as conversations with advocates that have been tracking this issue for a long time and this policy in other states. And I think that helps move the needle, as well as Rep. Terry's own experiences and background on this. So so we passed this policy this year, and it did receive bipartisan support in the taxation committee. What ended up initially happening was, like many other pieces of legislation, it was wrapped up into the budget and passed that way, which I think was just a little behind the scenes of what made the most sense for the political environment that we were in at the time. But there were definitely lots of stakeholders involved, advocates, and interested parties that came to the table to help craft this bill. Initially, we did propose $350 per dependent, and that was walked back to $300. And I think above all else, what I'd like to emphasize is that this is a foundation, and I think you mentioned that too, Susan. Getting this first step is really critical, and from here we can build. And so I think that we still want to view this as a success. The fact that it is fully refundable and that it includes dependents is huge as well, because I think including the dependents also added an element that was more politically palatable to the other side, as who typically would have been against this, I think. So that really helped a lot. That helps get a lot of people on board in both regards. So as you all know, this policy has been shown to support kids as well as other folks throughout their lives, including supporting higher educational attainment, better health outcomes, and higher earnings as adults. And actually, the Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy estimated that before this credit, before the federal credit was before our credit was instituted, after the federal credit was expanded and then revoked, 50,000 Maine families, including 73,000 dependent children and 35,000 dependent adults, were not receiving the full credit because their incomes were too low. That's a huge number of people that were with the greatest need that were not able to access this help. And so just, getting this to be fully refundable, I think, was a huge, huge benefit. And this same group has estimated that about 35,000 Maine children will be lifted out of poverty as a result of this. So for us, I think that's a really huge win as well. Something that we didn't talk about publicly in the behind the scenes sort of operation of this, but that I think is also a really big win, is that the way that we wrote this into the statute, we referred to the federal credit. And so we included ITIN filers as part of the beneficiaries of this, which I think was really important. And it was also important strategically to maybe not publicize that as much, but that's going to be really huge for a lot of people and making sure so many folks get help that they need. This is just one of the many fully refundable credits that we have, and one of many things that we've done in the state to try to help working families. We also have an EITC, we have sales tax fairness credit, a property tax fairness credit that are also hugely helpful for working families. And then of course, I don't know about of course, but you may have seen that we also passed paid family and medical leave in Maine this year, which was a huge, huge win. And we're very proud of that work as well. I think I'm happy to take any questions and happy to relay questions to Rep. Terry to get back to folks as well if I don't have the answer. But one thing that I just want to sort of close with is that when it comes to making policy around supporting folks in need, there can sometimes be sort of an unfortunate narrative about deservedness. And we typically associate programs like TANF and SNAP with handouts. But I think that tax policy in particular is a really incredibly important opportunity to shift that narrative. And the way that we structure our tax code and prioritize our shared investments makes a really powerful statement about what matters to us. So this policy that was, received bipartisan support clearly demonstrated that we believe in supporting all Maine families and in your states as well. And I think it really changes the tenor of the conversation and shifts it away from, who is deserving of what and towards a conversation around shared values and collective well-being. And I'm really proud of our ability to get this through this session.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Questions starting to roll in. We'll start with the first one, thinking about the costs and benefits of these policies. So there's different ways to think about who these policies benefit. It's anti-poverty, it helps with childcare, it helps with health, nutrition. Did you find that talking about the benefits in one way versus another was more helpful when communicating the benefits with colleagues and constituents?
Janet, do you want me to start, or anyone? So I look at many things just from an economic development platform. And I think, as was just mentioned, that's something that kind of everyone gets. And so child care tax credits have such an effect on getting eyes on kids really early. So if there are health issues, developmental issues, as we know, anything that can be caught early is usually much less expensive. So we've got healthier kids with really more flexible brains that are being launched into our society in terms of their own education and productivity and workforce later. That's a huge thing. So everyone can kind of feel good about that investment. And, the data already shows when families have the right support so that they can work to the maximum of the productivity that works for them, it's sort of the rising tide lifts all boats, us being all, kind of New England states. And that's where I would go with that.
So, if I could jump in, the way that we got bipartisan support for the child tax credit was to talk about it as an economic development tool. And like Maine, and I don't know if it's so true of Massachusetts, but certainly Maine and Vermont are known as being one of the oldest states, if not the oldest. I think we're second, maybe. And so we have a real issue and a real challenge in terms of bringing young families to the state and keeping young families in the state. And so this was viewed as a tool to begin to address that. And, historically, earned income tax credit has generally had bipartisan support anyway. Child tax credit, not as much because it's not tied to work. But we felt very good about the fact that we had bipartisan support through the House, through the Senate, and that the governor, who is a Republican, signed the bill. So I think those are one of the arguments that are useful to make.
Yeah, I would agree with all of those sentiments here too. Even though we have a trifecta in terms of the Democratic Party is in control of both houses and the governor's office, but still, we're a purplish state. So, and the margins are close in some regards, especially in the Senate. I think one thing that worked for us, aside from talking about it as an economic development opportunity and particularly a way to bring young families here, support young families, was the political environment in Maine, as it is in a lot of places, was one where Republicans were really pushing for tax cuts, as tends to be the case. And to be able to hold up this, just like to compare the two and hold them up to each other and show that this is going to have the impact that this will have on real working Maine families and money directly back in their pockets, I think, as maybe Susan mentioned, that I think that was a real selling point. Ultimately, politics is politics, and we had support on the taxation committee when it came through. That was bipartisan. And then, it when it was wrapped into the budget, that shifted a little bit, but it still made it through. So.
Great, thank you. So we have a question from the New England state without any income tax, and there's actually, I think, 9 states total that don't have an income tax. Any advice for folks in those states who want to do something to help families like this, but may not have that income tax infrastructure that they could jump onto?
I'll just say anything that we can do for employers to incentivize, anything that you can do with housing. I guess those would be 2 of the things I would spotlight.
I as a former chair of the Ways and Means Committee, I need to jump in and say that it would be great if you adopted an income tax. So that would be the easy solution. But the other thing, and I think it's one of the things I wanted to bring up, there is competition between trying to fund a child tax credit, trying to fund paid leave, and trying to fund childcare. And clearly, without an income tax, you can invest in childcare and in paid leave. But that competition for those dollars, I think, is one of the challenges that we all need to be thinking about going forward, because there are different ways that you can help families with young children, and there's a limited number of dollars to do it.
I don't really have anything to add. I think those are great suggestions. That reminded me, though, that I did forget to mention that we are in Maine in this upcoming session working on a child care tax credit as well. And it's so useful to hear that framing, Janet, that there is often competition amongst those priorities that all work towards the same goal anyway. But
if I can jump in, could you guys talk more about that in terms of dealing with these different priorities, right? So these are all sort of family policies, they're all economic development policies, and you have to figure out who gets what and when at a given time. Any advice for folks who are looking to balance those priorities, working within those same coalitions, working with different coalitions? How do you get that done?
Well, if I could jump in, as I said earlier, this last session, there was a very significant child care initiative on the table, 120 million, I think, which is, again, a lot of money for Vermont. And there was a proposal in the one body in the Senate to fund it by repealing the child tax credit, among other things. And I think those of us who want to invest in families and low-income families, but families with children, want to make healthy communities, need to be very cautious about taking money from one group of particularly a low-income group, and then giving it to another. If that had succeeded, it actually would have made our tax code less progressive rather than more. That the impact would have been greater because of the way the child tax credit works. Income would have been it would have been more negative for low-income families than it would have been for anybody else. So it would have been a disaster. So I think that all of these programs help similar people in slightly different ways. And so I think ideally you don't put all your eggs in one basket. You don't do just one of those things. But I think that competition is something that we need to be thinking about as policy makers and people who care about good policy going forward. I think it's a challenge.
Well, and I think the way to forward that, because I wholeheartedly agree, and that was well put, is to really look at, sort of the whole sort of economic community, and really, rather than, competing and where should the line be drawn, and really look more to benefits of, first of all, long-term costs. What happens if we don't support low-income families? What are those long-term costs? What if we have policies that really necessitate families to make substance choices in terms of, wow, women or, family members saying, I can't afford to go to work because, I can't afford the childcare, and, those really untenable decisions versus having those folks in the workforce and looking at the economic benefits of that. I think it really, the upside of the conversation that we've been having in Massachusetts is bringing in business. It's bringing in, sort of nutrition advocates. It's bringing in medical advocates, bringing in the business pieces of what does it take to run a childcare business? What do schools need? So going from early childhood all the way up to kids with special needs at age 15. So it was that if you can get representative folks in a room, I think a lot of times those issues become evident, and it's not easy.
Yeah, I would say that looking at it as looking at those three pieces, I completely understand how they do feel competing, but as I think both of you sort of alluded to as well, them also being complementary and important to look at in the holistic, economic environment of a state. I think what Reptarian folks in Maine are looking at doing is trying to incentivize, to also couple those with business incentives in a variety of ways, business tax incentives. For instance, this is, a bill that we're putting in this upcoming session that is still in the very nascent stages, but the child care tax credit bill that we're putting in, we're tying that to a pass-through entity tax, which is going to be, the revenue is built in by shifting the business tax sort of load there. So that's the different ways to get creative about how to link these things that we know are already linked. Like if we know that economic development is linked to these things in their outcomes, so we need to make that connection a little bit more clear and tangible when we're thinking about these policies.
Okay, and we have another question about the trade-off between income testing or targeting the benefits to lowest income families to get a higher credit. And this is something we've seen in California and Oregon and some other states out west, versus this maybe a smaller credit, but to a broader population, which is more of the New England model where you guys are. Can you guys talk about those trade-offs and how you thought about them?
So we had hoped initially to make it universal, which means not income tested at all. We ended up with pretty generous household income limits that's starting to phase out at 125,000 and then fully phased out at 175,000. And part of the thinking, again, we're talking about these different ways that we can help families, low-income families and families with kids, that their earned income tax credit, for example, and any kind of means tested program, as you begin to make more money, you lose benefits. So there's a disincentive to work and to increase your household income. We wanted to avoid that with this. And one of the things that we learned as we did we did do some analysis. I don't want to say that we didn't do any, but we did do some. But one of the things that we did is we started to look more deeply into the cost of doing various iterations of this credit, is that young kids typically don't live in higher income households. Typically, young kids are in lower income households, and as people's incomes go up, their kids get older. So as we went up the income scale, we really weren't adding kids, we weren't adding much cost. So that actually made it easier to have those higher incomes. So I just don't think you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Having different programs operate differently, I think is healthy.
And just another side of that, and the disincentives, I think, are super important point to make. But there's also the administrative cost of all of those sort of niggling points, and they're just really, and it's across from many levels of taxation, business, sole proprietorships, just really everywhere. When I'm in the district, people are basically saying, you're killing me with all of the hoops I have to jump through for these basic benefits. And also, from the state's perspective, managing and staffing all of these things, I think where, we really started to look at the data and appreciate, the value of simplicity in that regard.
Yeah, I think thinking about our revenue service agency and how we can work with them was an important factor, as well as what they need, what changes will need to be made for them to implement it actually on their end was really important. I don't actually remember if I mentioned our phase out, but we do have a phase out too, and it's 400,000 filing jointly, or 200,000 for single folks. Everyone 100,000 or every 1,000 above that, your credit is reduced by $7.50. And so, yeah, I think that I couldn't speak clearly to all of the trade-offs that went into that conversation, but I think it was generally a sense of what's going to be possible to get this over the finish line right now, and being willing to make compromises along the way.
And we have a question about how far to extend it in terms of questions about Social Security numbers versus being ITIN inclusive. And I think all 3 states are ITIN inclusive. What can you say about the decision making behind that?
Go ahead.
But we didn't do that when we first passed it because it didn't occur to us. And I think I was on another panel when I learned about that and shared it with the person who replaced me, and it got done. So was, again, some pretty, pretty simple for us in a lot of ways. I do at some point want to talk about the timing of how the credit gets into people's hands. And I don't know if this is a moment to do that, but I think what was so great about the federal credit is that people got it on a periodic basis. I think it was monthly. We weren't able to do that. And Susan made a comment about the administrative difficulties and challenges. And that was one where we finally just gave up and made it annual. But I think as years go on, or as time goes on, I think there's a real interest in getting it out in more frequently into people's pockets. I think that's an important issue for somebody who's looking at this to think about.
Was that a conversation that you all had when you were drafting the legislation, or was that in rulemaking with agencies that you made that distinction?
That was while we were working on it, but the tax department came in, and I used to be a tax commissioner, so I kind of got it. And when they came in and said they just couldn't do it, and I'm thinking, I understand, I could understand that, but I think there are ways that we can move forward. But there are also some issues about how it gets characterized as income, and wanting to be sure that it doesn't turn into adjusted gross income and cost people benefits in other programs. And that was another worry that we had. So it's another place where people need to be cautious.
That's the point I was going to make as well. I mean, you really can't give with one hand and take with the other, but we've made an intentional decision to, on the taxable income aspect of it, for one thing.
Regarding the ITIN versus Social Security thing, that was something from the get-go that advocates brought to our attention as being important. I think something that we haven't mentioned, but the way that this credit impacts equity in our states, even though our Maine is a very white state, I think that racial equity in particular will be dramatically impacted by this. And also, I think including that consideration and including ITINs was an important piece there.
I think now's probably a good time to open it up and ask you guys what you see as the future of these credits. So there's we all talk about foundations, laying that foundation. What does everyone think are the next best steps or the next priorities for building on these foundations that you guys have done such a wonderful job of laying?
Well, I can, because ours has now been in effect a year. One of the issues, and it's not a surprise, but the issue about outreach and making sure, because it's a refundable credit, making sure that people who don't have a tax liability know about the credit and file and get it. We estimated that the cost of our credit would be somewhere around 32 million, and I think we were talking about, well, 32,000 kids, obviously, if you do the math. And the now that we're mostly through the 23 filing year, filing for 22 tax year, we're in at about 24 million. So that's about 25% less than the estimate, which I think is pretty significant. Some of that is probably because people don't know that they're eligible. And I think it's a legislative concern, an administrative concern, it's an advocate concern. I mean, it's sort of everybody really needs to figure out what the best tools are to do that kind of outreach.
From my part, one of the things I think I'm most buoyant about is really being sure that we make investments not only at the lower income level, but at middle income level, young families, really, so that we have the intended result of helping, the housing industry, helping, competitiveness in Massachusetts in general. I really think that, the childcare policies can spearhead so much of that. So, and, certainly there's a lot of competition, but I think this is one where we will get the payback in income tax, for example, talking about income tax.
Yeah, for us, I know that we are definitely looking to expand this. We have the $300 credit now, and it is indexed to inflation, but we would like to continue to expand what's possible to offer in the coming session. We're definitely going to work on that and continuing to look at the holistic framework of tax code and tax policy that can lift families up, and how best to do that. I think your point, Janet, about making sure folks know this is available is huge, and we've definitely had trouble with that for a variety of other types of credits and programs that we've offered here. I think the pandemic relief checks that came from the federal government and from the state, we offered emergency pandemic relief checks to some Maine citizens. Had a similar problem, whereas you would qualify even if you didn't typically file your taxes. And so we did like a ton of outreach to try to get folks who typically wouldn't file to know that this was available to them. And I think that we're really hoping that all of that work has now like stuck in people's brains a little bit. But it also allowed us to work through some of the kinks of like, how do we message this and how do we communicate effectively to people that this is available, but it's an ongoing battle. And I think that's something that we want to look at moving forward too.
Just on that subject, there's a lot of distrust, whether it's people feeling like, data breaches are a risk, or just, government in general. So, I think it's always interesting to look at, service providers that people typically see on a regular course, whether, it's pediatrician offices, and, kind of maybe a distribution by a trusted, at a trusted location, something like that, is one of the things that comes to mind.
Great, so we have a couple of minutes left. Any final thoughts from our panelists? Any words of wisdom for our audience?
I want to say thank you, Vermont, especially. And of course, Maine as well. I think it's these opportunities that you've provided right here for us to collaborate in terms of views really can have an exponential result in terms of forwarding all of these policies. So thanks to the brilliant women in the boxes next to me.
As I said when we started, I love the fact that there's a New England model. And so, this is a wonderful group of women and who are pushing these policies forward. I was lucky enough to leave my committee in the hands of another wonderful woman. So I feel that that Vermont is going to continue to make strides in this area. Don't know if she's watching, but if she is, she'll like that. So Josh, thank you for getting us all together.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate this opportunity. I'm glad that Maine was able to lend its voice to this conversation. And I hope that that anybody feels welcome to reach out to Rep. Terry or me about any questions that you have about how this worked. And I really loved learning from both of you as well about, how your state's implementation went and is going. And that was really wonderful. And I would just reiterate that, I guess, two things. That, yeah, as we mentioned, this is a foundation, and I'm really proud of what we've done here and excited to build on that moving forward. Hopefully it makes it easier for folks to come after. And also, this is just such a wonderful way to utilize the tax code and tax policy, something that's typically dry, but that can actually has such a huge impact on people's lives. And I think it's just really exciting to be able to be a part of this work. So thank you all.
Awesome, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. We have been recording this, so we will post this online, and those couple of questions about closed captioning. So I'll try to make sure that the recording has closed captioning. Thank you to our panelists. I want to reiterate, you guys have done wonderful work, and we're really glad to have you here today. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.